So, programmatic has been called the unstoppable force by ExchangeWire. The IAB found that 18% of video inventory was traded programmatically in 2014, and eMarketer thinks that that's going to rise to between 70 and 80% of all digital spend in 2018. With these this focus on media placement and metrics, is this actually killing creativity as it stands? On the other side, we saw from the poll earlier on that people believe that poor quality content is actually partially what's leading to rise of things like ad blockers, and we're seeing increasing spend on content marketing budgets. So is that actually the savior of creativity in our industry? So I think it would be great if we can start just by actually defining what we think creativity actually really means in this context.
Shall I start?
Go ahead.
Just to answer we were debating backstage, we were trying to find something that we all disagree with so that actually we can have a bit more banter on stage. But in terms of, does programmatic kill creativity? I don't think it does at all. I think it's a massive opportunity, and I think as an industry that we all need to embrace technology and make sure that we're utilizing the data and being able to make the content that we are creating as relevant and as personal as possible to the audience we're trying to reach. I think one of the biggest challenges within the industry is actually how do you automate and create enough creative assets so the right asset is going to the right audience? And I think one of the challenges at the moment, and I'm sure you'll know more than me about this, is that you've got media companies who really, really understand their audience and they can distribute content to the audience, but they're being given one creative asset, which tends to be a broadcast asset, and trying to shove that into different contexts and different channels is very, very challenging. So there needs to be a way that you can actually create 50,000 versions of a great piece of video content that will then go into all the right channels, be all in the right context, and will be as relevant as possible for that particular audience, where they are, what time it is, what have they just done, what age are they, what is their grandmother like? And if you can actually use all that data and then utilize that to actually create creative assets, programmatic gives a huge, huge opportunity to really create much more relevant, effective, and creative content and indeed advertising.
So as has just been said, I think we're going to agree on quite a few points. Although I would argue, actually, if there's anyone from a creative agency here, they would probably suggest that that is limiting creativity dramatically, right? I'm not sure if actually that definition and what you've just said is actually enhancing creativity. I agree with what you said, and as a media agency, I agree that there's an incredible opportunity to target people with incredibly well-focused creative, like messaging. The question actually was, how do we define creativity, right? I think there are going to be different people that define it in different ways. I think there's going to be some people that will go, well, creativity is all about creating incredible art, incredible craft, and programmatic is going to fundamentally undermine that process. People come up with ideas that are magical, and if you were to ask a television station, for example, or an independent production company, are they using programmatic to come up with the next amazing television show? The answer is going to be no. They'll be using data, obviously, but it won't necessarily be something related to programmatic. On the other end of the scale, absolutely, you've got creativity that is a kind of creative strategy. Everyone thinks they're a bit creative in this industry. It's a creative industry, ultimately. But you've got creative strategy, and you've got an incredibly interesting way of targeting people. That is the thing that I think we're all going to sit here and go, well, yes, and I'd imagine that nearly everybody in the room is also going to. Are there any creative agencies represented here? No. Okay, so
lunch.
Still a lunch. Of course they are.
I think again, unfortunately, I think we are going to agree on a lot of points. But to address the question, what is creativity? I mean, obviously, creativity in the wider context is art and wondrous things. But But I think in the context of marketing, creativity is understanding who your audience is and being able to communicate with them effectively, really engage audiences through proper messaging, adding value to their journey as a human being, or what we call their buying journey. And I think if you look at the digital world right now, and certainly if you look at digital marketing, it feels like creative has been taken behind the shed and shot, to an extent, because I think creatives have been working with a very poor quality canvas, being kind of small boxes, so little 300 by 250 banner ads, which don't really give you the opportunity to put a message across to an audience and really get their attention and take them through to something that adds value, and that's beginning to change. I think that is now moving towards a point where brands and creatives and marketers are certainly paying attention to the fact, say, ad blockers are being adopted en masse, like 200 million global users now. And I think that kind of highlights the point that we are not communicating effectively, and we are confusing creativity with intrusiveness. And I think that's beginning to shift because platforms are emerging that are allowing brands and creatives to have a better canvas, being things like Vine and the big social platforms and YouTube, lots of great technology. And I don't think programmatic's related to that whatsoever. Programmatic is more a infrastructure to amplify and distribute that content once you've created it. So I think it's completely open, and subjective, but
so programmatic is one element, right? One element of many things that is threatening the definition of creativity being craft and art, right? It's one of many things, and one of the other things, critical things, is that frankly our audiences don't care as much as they used to. Right. They're harder to target. They're looking at other things. They can ad block stuff, and you could argue, therefore, that actually the challenge in front of creative people, creatives, or whatever you want to call them, is that they need to make they need to know their work even better than it ever was, right? Because people ultimately they need to make sure that people are choosing to engage with their content, simply put. So to get people to choose to engage with it, you need to create really amazing things that is going to be better than everything else that is ultimately vying for their attention. On the other hand, you've got the other end of the scale where, as we've been saying, you've got the opportunity with programmatic to create multiple messages, very targeted. But frankly, we're talking about something that I don't even think is an industry we've achieved yet. We're miles from this. I mean, there's a few agencies out there doing it. And in a media agency, we've been talking about this kind of stuff, programmatic or not, targeting people very specifically with creative messages for a decade. And yet, actually, as an industry, we're well behind. And we're talking about something I think is a problem that might not even be here yet. Mm-hmm.
I think that it's, the creative lens and the approach needs to dramatically change. So with the rise of ad blockers and the kind of, I guess, the unacceptability of interruptive advertising, which I think personally is pre-digital, that there needs to be a different approach, and you need to, as a brand, take an editorial approach to the content you're creating, and you need to think and behave much more like a publisher, which is really understanding your audience and actually creating stuff that they're interested in, that they want to engage with, that the media industries and the newspaper industries and the magazine industries have been doing it for years, and the advertising industry now needs to move in this direction. And if you look at a lot of the big brands now, what they're doing is looking at their marketing departments and questioning actually who the skills are within these marketing departments and whether they're right. And you're seeing a lot of the big fashion brands that are hiring editors-in-chief, they're hiring publishers, they're bringing journalists in-house, they're bringing designers in-house, they're bringing videographers in-house, because they want to behave much more like publishers, which is creating good editorial content. And then they're looking about how do they actually distribute that content across their owned and earned channels, how do they bring people into their own channels to engage with it, and then how do they distribute that out and paid. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity for native. We're seeing they're seeing a lot of interesting platforms that are looking to distribute native, but also you're seeing a lot of the big media companies, the Daily Mail, the New York Times, the Guardian, News Corp, just set it up, creating their own in-house studios where they're working with the brands and creating the content themselves because they understand the audience best, and they've got the skills in-house to create the content which they know that audience will like. So I think, you know, the term creativity, but it's actually, you know, how are we actually creating content that people want to engage with? And I think it was really, really important that there's a different, more editorial approach to creating that content.
We've talked a lot about brands as publishers. I like the point you're making here about brands learning from publishers, not brands trying to be publishers. Some brands can be publishers, and I think that's fine, and they have the right to do that, and they have the history and the, you know, almost permission, I think, from consumers to act like publishers and be publishers. But there are shitloads of brands out there that should stay well away from this, I think. And frankly, you know, we're heading towards a world where you know, we continue to be flooded by crap content. Right. And if everyone does try to be a publisher, then the whole of the world is going to become a server.
Yeah, I agree to an extent, right? I think if there was, I think the opportunity now with live streaming and platforms like Vine and YouTube, and the emergence of better advertising infrastructure to allow brands to distribute, you know, proper editorial and video content rather than kind of just popping it into a square box. I think that is allowing massive investment from certain brands into really high quality content that is as good as, if not better than, the content that they would get when they open the newspaper in general. So, you know, for example, if it weren't for that evolution digitally, we would not have Red Bull paying for someone to jump from space. You know, and if it weren't for the evolution that we've seen recently, we would not have guys like Adam Aston moving over to the New York Times content studio and spending 8 weeks on a really deep investigative feature on behalf of Orange is the New Black for Netflix. And he said to us that, you know, that is pretty much the first time in his whole career where he's had the budget to do everything he can dream of doing in a very ambitious project. So I think, you know, we are seeing, we're seeing a lot of great content from great brands, but at the same time, yeah, I understand the point that, you know, if a brand is selling dishwashers, for example, you're not really going to get stuck into a piece of content from them that is that exciting, you know.
Well,
and there's a time and a place in a certain brand. And
you could.
Again, that's creativity, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can they engage marketers and agencies to think about their product, think about their audience? And it might not necessarily be a case of just writing about their product. It might be a case of finding other things that their audiences associate with and then aligning the brand with that.
Yes.
And that's creative.
Or I think more, I mean, we really are kind of going off programmatic, but I think more importantly, and I feel very strongly about this, it's about brands actually standing for something much more meaningful and having a purpose. And I think that whether you are a dishwasher, tablet or whatever, actually as a business, as long as you are doing good and you have a social purpose, you can actually stand for something way more than the price or your product. And actually you can actually create content that people be interested in because you should be having a positive effect on the world. And I think, you know, there is an appetite for brands to be more human in how they communicate and, you know, to move very much from thinking about business to consumer and B2C and think more about, you know, H to H, human to human. How can they actually have a proper conversation, stop interrupting, stand for something great and be meaningful? And I think, you know, you look at a company like Unilever, which has got a brilliant sustainability agenda and, you know, they're seeing a huge increase in profitability and revenue for the brands that really have a social purpose and that they stand for something good. And I think as we have, you know, new millennials becoming the you know the consumers and the influencers of, you know, of our world, they expect more. They expect more from brands and they expect them to actually stand for something. And I think that those that don't are going to struggle.
So to that end, I mean, do you think that content marketing is the kind of is the way that advertising is going? Do you think this is the kind of complete solution to the industry?
Certainly not complete, but a big part of it. I think your point, kind of H to H or H to B to H, to see, or whatever it might be. I think that's kind of essentially the whole dynamic has shifted. So it's more of a democracy now, isn't it? Given, again, social media and the ability to not necessarily look at an index of your consumers and figure out what they need, but actually to genuinely listen to them and talk to them over social channels and so on. That tells you what content they want to see, whether it's educational, informative, entertaining, whatever. I think you can get a far better gauge if you're a smart brand and you're engaging with consumers on a kind of human-to-human level. And then on the back of that, brands are becoming publishers, brands are becoming the content commissioners and curators. And you're seeing guys like, Jamie Oliver with FoodTube, for example, going and building out a whole channel that's separate from his kind of pre-planned TV stuff. It's more reactive to the audience. And sponsors are getting heavily involved in that.
And why is he so successful? Because he's a human being talking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So actually, I was going to ask a question. I'm not sure if I've got the answer myself, which is a dangerous thing to do when you're sitting on stage. But what percentage then is going to be content marketing versus interruptive advertising? Discuss.
I think, even content marketing can be interruptive when done badly. You said a minute ago that you still see plenty of terrible content being distributed, and that's something that I call the barbell effect. We've got, on one end, very high quality, well-invested content being distributed, but you've got publishers adopting the means to distribute this content, and they need revenue to support it. And as you've got intermittent adoption of the distribution of proper quality advertising, the kind of backfill, if you like, is this horrendous clickbait kind of, side boobs and bikinis and wags and all this stuff. And that's the bottom of the barrel kind of arbitrage clickbait content that's being distributed. Nobody's really invested in that. Somebody in their bedroom has knocked together a piece of content that promotes some funny herbal pills or whatever it might be. Yeah. And that's a real shame to see that happening, because that is going to create, in the very same way as kind of the squash the cockroach and punch the monkey ads of 1992 or 93, that's going to create the same wear out and exhaustion within the native and content channel as those kind of ads did with display. And that's going to create more ad blocking that focuses on not just display but also native.
I thought you were going to go, when you started talking then, I thought you were going to start trying to define what content marketing is, and that was going to be a conversation we could have had a couple of years ago, or even native advertising.
I hate those conversations. Yeah. Here's the word, define it.
But I mean, interestingly enough, think about the fact that, so if we look at content marketing as content that people choose to engage with, which is a little bit of a fluffy term, in fairness, because some people will choose to engage with it and a lot of people won't. You can't define it by one person choosing to engage with it. For example, if you put a telly ad on YouTube, does it suddenly become content marketing because people are going onto YouTube to watch it? I mean, that's a debate in itself. But I think that there's an interesting debate also about the fact that actually you still need to put interruptive advertising out there to actually get people to drive to your content. So you're actually using paid advertising to go, come and look at my content marketing, to then go and purchase something further down the funnel.
I think we like to break content marketing into three key areas, which is you have your campaign content, which is the most similar to advertising, which is your kind of big campaign spikes, which is driving awareness, and that then drives to your publishing content, which is your much more editorial focused content, which is more likely to live in your own channels, where you're not banging on about your brand or your product, but you're actually talking about things that are interesting, things that are relevant, entertaining, or useful that you'd actually seek out. And then you have your conversion content, which is really in the customer journey, in the sales funnel, which is actually supposed to drive people to purchase. And if you break content out into those three key areas, I think there's always going to be a place for all of them. As more people just search directly what they want, conversion content is hugely important. It's about showing the product in the best possible light and getting people over the line. Editorial content you should invest the most in, the publishing content, because that will build your authority, and it should in theory build trust and build loyalty, because audiences will seek that content out, and then the campaign content will create awareness and drive people into that funnel. And I think if you think about it in those three areas, it helps put together a plan.
So we call them inspire, involve and inform. I think probably everyone has got a concept framework, and I think it's probably always 3.
Right, involve and inform, okay.
Yeah. I don't know if you've got 3.
Happy with that? No.
Okay.
All good.
So I'd like to bring us actually back to that point that you made, Chris, about kind of essentially kind of millennials and those kind of how you create, essentially how you brands can kind of start to create content that expresses their role in society or or their purpose to the world. And we know that generation are kind of actually quite kind of quite suspicious of brands in markets like the UK. Can content aimed at this group ever be truly authentic if it comes from brands?
I think that if the brand is authentic, then their content is authentic. I think if a brand tries to create content which is not truthful or is not relevant to who they are and what they do, then the millennial generation, who have the best bullshit detectors on the planet, won't pay it any interest. So I think it's important that a brand is honest, transparent, make sure that actually it has a purpose which needs to go right back to the corporation about what it stands for and what it wants to do, and that needs to lead into their MarCom strategy, what will be their content strategy, of which will reflect what they are doing and what they stand for as a brand. And their social purpose may be about the environment, sustainability, or it may be, maybe one of the other sustainable development goals that I think that this generation think are the most important things that need to be done in the next 15 years. So I think, standing for something and then creating content which is useful for them, informative, maybe educates them and is relevant.
I think there's also if you try and get it back to a little bit towards programmatic specifically, I think there's another important point about labelling. The actual content itself, what is in it, what the editorial content, that's one thing, but making sure that people get that it is actual content from a brand is really important. If we don't do that, then we're failing as an industry, and I think the consumers are rightly going to be very suspicious of what we're doing. So I think, again, we're all in agreement. I wouldn't imagine anybody in the room is going to disagree with the fact that you need to label very clearly that it's sponsored or it's brought to you by a brand. But I still think there's work to be done in the industry on that. I still think that, I know that the IAB, for example, is working very hard on getting kind of universal labelling in place. The industry has got some work to do.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the tough piece will be how to police that, because I think the really serious players in terms of the tech platforms, the publishers, the brands, they're all pretty much in agreement that especially as you move to more of a content-first approach and as you move towards a kind of native, monetized, multi-device kind of digital world, you are going to have that issue of, the more you blend in, the more you at the same time need to stand out with disclosure and transparency. And I think all of the serious players are...
Out of interest, how do you do it?
So we do 2 things. So firstly, all of our major vendors that we connect onto our platform have to use one of the 2 or 3 accepted terms in the IAB, which are sponsored post, sponsored content, or advertisement.
Can you say in
piece
partnership with?
Sorry?
Can you say in partnership with?
I suppose you could. I think there are grey areas, and I think and I wouldn't want to vote either way necessarily without really thinking about it. I think that's all. There's already been a movement with the FTC in America and the IAB to sit down and go, okay, here are the 20 examples we've seen: paid posts, partnership, and let's survey consumers and figure out, do they know this is clearly an ad? And there were 2 or 3 that emerged, generally sponsored post and sponsored content, because that's what's being used on Facebook and Twitter, and that's what has already got scaled exposure, and I think so users have started to accept that, and I actually think within the native ad space, there's also the adoption of the ad choices icon. Problem is how many users outside of the ad industry know what that little squiggly icon is, but still, the adoption of that is another good step in the right direction. I think the problem is, firstly, how do you police people that don't participate in that way? Because there's a whole new internet that has emerged around the kind of BuzzFeed model, but a lower quality version of it, where essentially publishers, or loosely using the term publishers, spin up some content, pay for it, and bring in audiences through kind of into almost a closed network of this kind of clickbait content, and circulate them through, and there's very little transparency. And in fact, native ads are being used in an interruptive way, where you try to click out the site and it pops up and gives you another 10 tiles of side boobs and so on. And nobody wants to see that, and it's very hard to actually, if you go and do a lookup on who owns that domain, it's all obfuscated and anonymized. It's very difficult to police that, and I really don't know how we would go about it. I don't have the answer for that. And the second piece is, I think the big platforms, the likes of the share-throughs, the triple ifs, there's probably 50 or 60 kind of bigger native platforms that are being used a lot by content marketers to amplify through paid promotion. I think they're all adopting disclosure pretty well. However, I think it's more the kind of advertorial space where you see these full posts of content, like literally full editorial articles, where one small sponsored disclosure at the top is going to get lost amongst a very big piece of content, as opposed to a disclosure within a smaller ad unit. And I think that's really where we need to do a lot of thinking, because if you get halfway through an article and then realise it's an advertorial, I think you might get disenfranchised.
But then you pick up a copy of the paper version of the New York Times, and you'll read a beautifully crafted editorial, and then right at the bottom that you need with a magnifying glass, it will say produced by NYT Studios.
Yeah.
That most people will not even realise. So it's not being adhered to in the physical version.
Yeah, true.
Same with the data.
It should be.
I think it probably should be. Realistically, at the end of the day, if the content is paid, it does need to be disclosed in order to have, in order to keep that trust relationship. I believe that trust relationship between brands and their consumers and publishers is a really strong one and needs to be maintained. And even though it's been done like advertorials have been done for, hundreds of years, paintings on the ceilings of Rome and Venice were sponsored by the church. This is all kind of paid content, but I think we can keep getting better as an industry, and that's going to be key in order to have that authenticity and to keep the trust.
I'd like to just unpick that a little bit, because we've just heard in the last panel a lot about kind of ad blocking and how, kind of when consumers feel that kind of trust kind of relationship's been broken, the things that can come out of it. I mean, what do you think? You talked a little bit about kind of the labelling of native and how that's, how you don't feel that that's necessarily working for the consumer. I mean, what problems is that kind of stacking up for the future?
What problems are ad blocking specifically stacking up? Or
I mean, the labelling of native advertising.
Well, I mean, it's a bit of a problem. The ad blocking panel earlier was obviously very lively, unsurprisingly. That obviously is a massive threat to the industry. I think we need to learn from the likes of Roy, sitting there listening to him. He's got quite a lot of important things to say. I think labelling, I think it's going to become an issue. I think it is going to become an issue. I think we need to make it clearer, frankly. I think we need some more rigid guidelines. And I think people are going to, consumers are going to wise up to it. I think at the moment, we're talking about a lot of this stuff on the basis that we think that consumers care, and a lot of them don't care. A lot of them don't care, they don't know, they don't understand. They don't understand the implications of blocking their ads, and you can support ad blocking or not support ad blocking. Consumers make a decision to do it, and it's going to impact on our industry. And I think labelling is going to be a big issue as well. And I think that we've clearly got to do something about it. And I think there's another interesting debate about. You could say that labelling of advertiser-funded content is a very good thing, that we're all kind of, we're all in it together. We all agree that that's right. But what about the decades of PR agencies influencing content without that disclosure? And that's another kind of a debate that we probably should be talking about in this kind of forum.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in that instance you've paid the PR agency, but you haven't paid the publisher, and it's kind of more earned media, and, and hopefully the journalists are credible enough to make those decisions on the merit of the brand.
The smart PR agencies should be looking at native as the biggest opportunity for them to go after the media, the media budgets, because
PR wire 2.0, isn't it? You know,
totally,
more
because
addressable.
they understand the audience, they understand editorial, they know all the publications. That if they actually had native platforms or plugged them in, they would be able to be buying paid media.
Yep.
Great. So it sounds like it sounds like these developments have actually just, rather than kind of killing creativity, are actually changing the boundaries of kind of what we define creativity as, and kind of like how we essentially how we activate things in terms of kind of content and in terms of how it's shared. Just to think about. I mean, do you think the creative community are really up to speed on how to use all these developments?
No.
I don't think that it's creativity. I mean, what you said is really changing. It's always going to be a brilliant idea. I think that the fundamental thing is the context. You know, it used to be very easy about where something is going to go, and now it's about what kind of behavior, what are you doing, where are you, what device are you on, what channel are you on. There's so many different contexts of where that idea needs to go, that it needs to actually adapt to the location, to the technology, to the behavior, to the mindset that you're in. So it's become more complicated. So I don't think that in any way it's reduced creativity. I just think that, you know, the content and the context now need to blend seamlessly together, and they both need to be thought about when you're coming up with the idea, whereas that has almost separated, you know, like within the traditional world, the creative and the media agencies kind of split. Now it's absolutely fundamental that the idea and where it's going to go are thought about at the beginning.
So let's be clear also, we are not even scratching the surface. We're having this debate, and many people have had this debate before, but we're not even scratching the surface, because we are still receiving on a daily basis 30-second tele-ads to put on YouTube to be a skippable pre-roll and a non-skippable pre-roll, in the belief that that's okay. And it's obviously, we know it's simply not.
Can you say that again?
And it's a massive challenge, and it's ludicrous. The industry is behind where it should be, and we've got to do something about it.
But it's the fact that, you know, that TV viewing is going down, but the cost of TV advertising is going up, right?
Yeah.
Where else is the money going to go? There's a big announcement, well, it's probably been announced already, but Facebook is about to change their measurement in terms of actual video metrics, so it'll be as similar as television, so that most marketers really understand where their money can go. But I agree with you, we're not being creative enough in terms of what we're creating and how we're getting it in front of people.
So the examples, you know, the examples we have where we're doing it right are just few and far between, and that's the biggest problem. We know we have a huge amount of data. We know we can target people very specifically. We know we can do amazing things with programmatic, and yet we're simply not, as an industry, doing it. We're talking about it. We're not not doing it.
Yeah, agreed. I think there's just too much disconnection between all the levels that get involved in this whole process. And I mean, we all talk about programmatic being actually a wonderful thing in terms of creating the infrastructure and scale to reach audiences, you know, in a meaningful way, providing the transparency and data to personalize messaging and make sure that your wealth of content is distributed to be personally relevant to the audience and to achieve its KPIs. But I mean, there's all this data that comes out of the other end, and the feedback loop is broken going back to the creative, you know, the kind of origins. And if you're intending to achieve certain KPIs with your audiences and with a campaign, the creatives fundamentally need to know what they are producing and why and what it's intended to achieve. And if they don't know that, the ads are not going to engage the audience in the first instance, and there's nothing else to measure.
But they also need to assign a correct amount of budget to that as well. That's a critical point, right?
Yeah, I think
this is so. This, if, you know, going back to the original question, is it threatening creativity, or whatever the actual word was? You know, if you could argue that yes, agencies are going to have to assign more money to programmatic to very clever targeting, to creating different formats for different devices, then maybe yes, because frankly they're going to have less money to make that amazing 70-second telly ad. I've never heard one of those before. 90-second telly ad that they can dine out on for the rest of their career, which you know is frankly a model of the past.
Right. Yeah, I think that definitely investment is another part of it. I think consolidation of all these silos and bringing them into one proper channel is part of the way that we need to address
And why,
that loop, and the other is investment.
yeah, the media companies should be bringing the studios and the creative production in-house.
It
Because
seems
they
to be
have
happening.
the audience and the distribution, and I think the real creativity comes in using the data to monitor and change and optimize and evolve everything that's out there. If it's not working, shut that down, turn that one on, that's working.
Yeah.
How do we keep improving
And
everything?
I think we are seeing some of the more entrepreneurial, kind of fast-moving, smaller agencies and smaller shops moving back to a fully integrated kind of end-to-end approach. And I think that will be reflected across the whole industry to remove all of those kind of layers of cost and bureaucracy, but also to bring back that feedback loop that informs
Do you
the
pay
whole
him to say
thing.
that?
And creative agencies historically have never made anything, and I think it's often been questioned why not. And I think production was often like, oh, well, it doesn't matter, it's only the production. Whereas now brands want more stuff made. Production is becoming more important. You look at Hollywood. What's the most important at the top of the chain? Is the studios that make the stuff. Now we need to make more content. The media companies, I believe, the big media companies have a real opportunity to be doing the thinking, audience planning, programmatic, creating the great video content, distributing it out there, monitoring it, optimizing it, and leading the narrative and what I like to call the long idea of what's going on, as opposed to the big idea, which is what the agencies have been doing.
But also what clients are expecting a lot as well. Let's be clear about that as well. That it's not a very sexy thing. That what we're talking about. We all buy it. We all agree with it. I think, but it's not that sexy. And
Programmatic.
Well,
I think programmatic's sexy.
Okay, fine. Okay, yes, so do I. But clients are the ones with the budgets. We need to be better at convincing them. I think that this is what they should be looking at, and they need to be able to rightly assign their budgets accordingly.
Great. So thank you very much, everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I will leave you for the next. I'll leave Vinny to introduce the next panel. Thanks.
Questions?
Oh, if anyone in the audience have any questions that they'd like to put to the panel? No?
We nailed it.
Thank you.
Got it.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Got all the answers right.
Thank you.